Welcome back to the Conversations with Cacao podcast. Today we have Moses with us from Embue Cacao. And Moses is the co-founder of Embue Cacao and has been working with cacao for well over a decade, with healing modalities for longer. His background and training have included body-based psychotherapy, awareness practices such as meditation, nature connection, and expressive arts such as dance and kirtan, and plant medicines such as cacao. Embue Cacao is one of the oldest ceremonial cacao providers and is currently based in Vermont, where they craft their own product from bean to bar with single origin organic cacao. Moses is a husband and a father of 4 beautiful children, and we hope that you enjoy this conversation today. Welcome back to the Conversations with Cacao podcast. I'm here with Moses from Embue Cacao, and we are excited to dive into this conversation here today. But before we even begin to drop into this conversation, let's find some space around us from our mind, from the outside world, allowing ourselves to really drop into our bodies. Taking a deep breath in, and exhaling on sound. Taking another deep breath in and releasing any stress or tension we're holding in our body as we sink even deeper into the present moment, allowing ourselves to feel our feet on the ground, allowing ourselves to really begin to feel our body, this vessel that we're in, that we get to inhabit. And maybe you imagine this, I like to imagine a feather in our mind as it begins to gently flow down from the mind, past the throat, past the shoulders, settling right into the heart space, so that we can cultivate this place of deep listening, allowing ourselves to hear what we really need to hear to help us along our journey, to make life a little more fun, more inspiring, and just allowing this lightness to flow around our heart as we breathe into our heart space. Exhaling all around our heart, opening the place where Mama Cacao plays with us, strengthening our heartbeat, strengthening our connection. And from this place of connection, let's just envision all of the listeners here right now and beaming them our love, seeing this light connection all over the globe, and letting yourself receive that love too. And then beaming our love to our guest today, Moses, seeing him fill up with all this beautiful light and gratitude. And beaming our love to our previous listeners, feeling the connection with them. And beaming our love to all of the future listeners. And allowing ourselves to feel this beautiful nucleus of connection, of interconnection, and synergy begin to form. And from this space of openness, of gratitude, of love, bringing our cacao into our hands, into our heart space, as we just offer a simple blessing to the heart of Mama Cacao, this beautiful plant medicine that guides us, that shows us so much about ourselves, about the world. And from the space, we give thanks to the heart of the earth, blessing the heart of the earth, giving thanks to the heart of the sky and blessing the heart of the sky, giving thanks to the heart of the waters that live within us and the waters on our planet, giving thanks to the heart of the fire within us and the fire that burns, and blessing all of the fire keepers that know the wisdom and can understand the wisdom of the fire. Giving thanks to the heart of the air and the 4 winds that we breathe, to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west. giving thanks to the heart of ether, and giving thanks to the heart of the void. And from our heart space, connecting in as we give thanks to the sacred medicine, the heart of Mama Cacao, blessing all of the guardians and protectors of the lands from which our cacao has traveled, blessing all of the farmers, all of the hands that made this cacao possible, and blessing our very own hands holding this cup today, knowing that this medicine was made specifically for us. Nobody else in the world is drinking your cup today. That Mama Earth created this cup just for you. And allowing your intention to maybe be received from Mama Cacao, or maybe you have a whisper from your heart. And if you wish to activate your cup with your breath today, as we come into presence, opening ourselves up to receive the wisdom from this conversation here, and allowing ourselves to really listen from a deep space of connection. And when you're ready, coming back into the space. And you have a beautiful cacao company. I have drank your cacao for many, many years, and it was my daughter's favorite back in the day when it was Heartblood. She's like,
Yeah,
I want Heartblood cacao.
that's awesome.
Yeah, and I would love for you to introduce yourself. Yeah, share with your listeners about you and your journey.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name's Moses. I'm co-founder of what's now Embue Cacao. It used to be called Heartblood Cacao when we first started. My wife and I started it, I don't know, 13, 14 years ago, back when internet searches would reveal nothing about ceremonial cacao and cacao ceremony, and no one had heard of it. Yeah, so the two of us, my wife Amba and I, had been traveling in Central America. We were at a gathering in Costa Rica, and about 40 or 50 people there. We knew about half of them, and someone said on the opening night, we're going to do a cacao ceremony. And in my mind, I just thought, oh, chocolate. I love chocolate. I've always had a sweet tooth. This sounds great. But little did I know that it was opening a whole doorway. And after about 20 or 30 minutes sitting with this group around the fire, I had this overflowing feeling of love for everyone there, even the people I didn't know. And it was effortless. It wasn't like some kind of practice that I was engaged in cultivating. It just kind of came on really strong. And I realized there was a lot more going on than just chocolate that I knew as a kid. And for me, it also came at a synchronistic time in my own healing journey where I'd say in my earlier 20s, I had a tendency to think of spirituality as this thing that I was doing and accomplishing and I was getting somewhere. And cacao had this really beautiful way of just saying, hey, we're here, we don't need to go anywhere else. And with the kind of rich presence that cacao brings, that helped me do that. And it connected really well with a lot of the therapeutic work that I've been doing and other spiritual practices. And so that kicked off a whole exploration of what kind of tool is this for inner work, and spent a couple of years working with it. Spent some time in Guatemala studying with Keith, and then Heartblood was born because we wanted to share it. Back then, there was no kind of organized way that cacao for ceremony was being brought into the U.S. Um, and I never really started it, or neither of us started with the intention of growing some big company or really imagining much more than just the experience with ceremonial cacao was powerful, and we wanted to share that and share it in ceremony and share the product and make higher quality cacao more available. And the whole thing over the last 10 plus years has really just taken off on in ways that are beyond our own company. Obviously, it's cacao ceremony is happening everywhere and lots of different providers and a lot of cool stuff going on. And so we've kind of just been riding that wave into what started out as a real part-time passion project, and now we've got our own whole production shop, and we're sourcing beans from different parts of the world and doing the whole production ourselves, and just kind of continuing to follow where things seem to want to lead. I tend to like to find the place in my life where there's some meeting point between what I want and what the world wants. Not too much of what I want, not too much of what the world wants. Just some place where it seems to be there seems to be movement there, and that's kind of how we've gotten to the place where we are with Imbue.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh.
Really, really fascinating. And I think it's, you're somebody super unique to speak to because you have been on this journey for so long. And
Uh,
now, as the cacao is coming more and more into the spotlight, there's more and more people waking up to knowing this medicine. I'm curious for the listeners that may be newer to this plant medicine, what is the journey that you've really seen from the beginning to now with cacao? How has the conversation changed around cacao since you began until now?
uh. I guess I would say the main way that I've seen the change, both for myself and just in our customers and people coming to it, is it's broadened from maybe more of a rigid idea of a ceremony and what that it looks like to all the different ways that cacao can support us, even as a, I don't like to use the word, but superfood or just from the nutritional kind of background, daily use of it. Um, so there's kind of a blending of the more formal ceremonial world into just, we've got plenty of customers who replace coffee with cacao, use it for daily health benefits, mix in lots of other things. And so I think that's one of the bigger changes that I've seen. And then just the scope of it, like I talk to people sometimes, or I in my mind I imagine, someone hasn't heard of it and they're like, oh yeah, I was at a ceremony last weekend, or it's just a much more common thing. And it makes me think about what it must have been like in the early days of yoga coming to the West, where there maybe at some point there was one yoga teacher, and that was their shtick, was teaching yoga because no one else did yoga. And now like everyone and their grandmother is a certified yoga teacher. um, and that's great, and lots of people love it and they get benefits, and it changes and evolves over time. But I think that's kind of the natural process of culture, of just cultures meet and they uh, practices and beliefs and all that change over time. And I think from my perspective, there's a lot more people getting benefit up from it because of that, both in the formal ceremony setting and just in, more of a, I might say, just like a reverential use of it in a daily way, developing a daily ritual, even if it's not a full ceremony. Um, yeah. I, I think my sense of cacao itself is that it works as medicine regardless of how we think about it or in what form we consume it. So, Hershey's chocolate bar, Valentine's Day, I mean, it's all a spectrum of the cacao working its magic. And I think it's for me, I have a pretty kind of open view of the love that cacao shares, and it comes in many many forms, some a little more diluted. But I think in Western culture we already have a relationship with cacao through chocolate that has a lot of the same elements that people are discovering in more concentrated form in ceremony. When you think about Valentine's Day, you think about the common kind of like, oh, like I feel depressed, I'm gonna go eat some chocolate. It's a similar thread or through line, I think, in all of it.
Yeah. I love the analogy to yoga as well, where it is this like newer um, form of connecting with ourselves that is coming in. And also in the same way, uh, like yoga, like you can do yoga, and depending on how deep your practice is as a yogi and your understanding of the energetic centers, like you can do yoga with some teachers and like the energetic activation and the alignment of how they just push you so slightly into this pose and how it opens up your channels is phenomenal. And I feel like that's like pure ceremonial cacao, when you're in
Uh-huh.
a fire ceremony, or just the activation and the intention and the prayer behind that cacao can open up this dimension that you didn't even know was there. But then also, if you practice yoga with somebody who, has their 200 hours, 300 hours, it's still good to move your body. Like
Uh-huh.
at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's still good for you.
Yeah.
I think about it a lot in relationship to the sacred medicines that we find within our supermarkets, like chocolate. We have cigarettes, tobacco,
Uh-huh.
corn, and how this feel like, for me, it feels like the relationship to the sacred or the divine, and how sometimes we're looking for what it the essence of what it's providing, like
Mhm.
tobacco, like corn, and chocolate, cacao, but we find this relationship of abuse or misuse with it. But the essence is still there, right?
Uh,
When we have all of this connection and conversation with the planet that we're on. I'm curious about your feeling of what cacao's mission is at this time on planet Earth, and if
Share the
it's
love.
share the love, yeah.
Share the love. I mean, it's to me, it seems really simple. There's a lot of different layers to it, but it just, yeah, that's to me, that's always the message. I think that's partly why people get called to share cacao themselves so quickly, is it's like this strong sense of love that so many of us are craving in our lives, and I think it just wants to be shared. And my sense is that cacao doesn't care how and with who; it just wants to share it. I mean, that's why, that's where my view on, things like Hershey chocolate, etc. It's just like cacao is happy to spread that love, and it's not too picky about it. And if you think about the plant in a biological sense, it's a very promiscuous cross-pollinator. You can get multiple varieties on one tree because of that. And so I think there's just a certain kind of abundance to the energy of cacao that wants to be shared.
Interesting. Um, would you talk a little bit more about the scientific aspect that you know? And I know some people are a little bit newer to the understanding of cacao and actually how it's pollinated,
Uh-huh.
what the pollinators are.
Yeah, yeah. So cacao is a tropical tree. They grow in what they call the 2020 zone, 20 degrees north and south of the equator. Pretty specific conditions in terms of annual rainfall, humidity, heat. Um, Originating from South America, moving to Central, and now at this point, it's kind of anywhere in that 2020 belt across the world. They grow it. They grow it in Vietnam, obviously West Africa. And it's originally an understory rainforest plant. And so the jungle forest floor would have been a deep leaf litter, and there's something called a midge, which is a little insect that lives in the leaf litter, and that's what pollinates cacao trees one to another. And cacao is cauliforous for any biologist or botanically oriented people out there, which is interesting because it's the flowers and the fruit actually grow right out of the trunk or the stem of the tree. Um, so there's these tiny little flowers, really pretty little flowers. They're teeny, and those get pollinated by the midges, and then the cacao fruit grows right out of the tree. It looks kind of like it's like Nerf football shaped, tons of different colors, formations, depending on variety. So, inside, if you've got like, pinks, yellows, reds, lots of different colors. And when it's ripe, you break it open and there's 30 to 50 seeds inside the cacao seeds surrounded by the white pulp, the sweet tart pulp, which is, just like any fruit that's a food source. You could just eat that straight. It's really good. Doesn't taste a whole lot like chocolate. And so you'd have cacao beans at that point in their raw form. Um, and in their raw form, doesn't taste a lot like chocolate. It's very bitter. It's high in tannins. It's got phytic acid like other seeds, so it's not very digestible to humans. I definitely don't recommend raw cacao. Um, and so then, that's where once it's freshly harvested, that's where you'd start the whole process of transformation. And one of the things I find really fascinating about cacao is there's not many similar products where, like a banana, it's ripe, you take it off the tree, you eat it. Cacao requires multiple steps that it undergoes that are chemical enzymatic transformations that really alter the composition of it, make it digestible to humans, make it more bioavailable, etc., and give us what we know of as chocolate flavor. And so there's a lot of steps, after harvesting that it goes through.
Thank you for taking us on that journey and
Uh-huh.
giving the scientific background as well. And it's so beautiful to see the cacao trees growing and like the beautiful
Uh-huh.
flowers that they produce. It is a very unique way that it does grow. Okay, so you said in Costa Rica was your first experience
Uh-huh.
with cacao.
Yeah.
And did you feel any calling towards that place specifically or the jungles? Because I know Costa Rica actually has a really rich
Uh-huh.
history in chocolate.
Yeah. I was there for a festival called Forest Dance that a friend of mine put on that I've been attending for a bunch of years. It's a sacred fire gathering, and um, it had happened in stateside in the U.S., and I just decided to go down to the one they were doing in Costa Rica. So that was what got me there. I didn't have any. I never even heard of ceremonial cacao at that point until that very first night around the fire when someone said we're doing a cacao ceremony. And I was pretty hooked right after that experience.
And you
Yeah.
said that you worked with Keith.
I did. Yeah. Yeah. Spent some time with my wife and I spent some time with him in Guatemala. Yeah.
Wow. And what was that like for you, learning from his wisdom in that way? And because he was also very unique in propelling this movement.
Yeah. There's definitely many roads lead back to him in the modern cacao ceremony world, for sure. So I think all of us owe him a debt of gratitude in that regard. Yeah. It was really beautiful. A lot of cacao ceremony, a lot of learning for myself, the ways that cacao worked, the ways that it supported me, the different ways that it paired with different practices, kind of helped me develop a deeper background with cacao. Um, and, Keith definitely has a very Keith-like way of working, in his ceremonies have a very unique flavor that I don't see that much elsewhere. And that's just, I think the beauty of cacao is that people feel the underlying possibilities with it for healing and spiritual work, and then the form that it takes can be so different. So, Keith had his way, his kind of open-ended, kind of what I call like psycho-spiritual group processing was kind of his what he was most known for. Um, and so that was, it's kind of like just um, this way of managing the group energy that was usually pretty beautiful. I mean, it definitely wasn't for everyone, but I definitely think that Keith has a pretty central role in modern cacao ceremonies. When I visited him 13, 14 years ago, I mean, he extensively searched in Guatemala. I mean, he'd been living there for a while for, Mayan practices, any kind of connections, and he couldn't find anything. There really was, there was a guy named Isaias that worked with him for a lot of years. Isaias has his own cacao company now, Lava Love. And yeah, even through that connection and being, a bit more embedded in the communities there was no um, local knowledge comparable to what he was doing in a way. So it definitely was very pioneering in a sense. And, I'm sure that history gets complicated because there's now people who have teachings related to the Mayan teachings in cacao, and that's all either come out or been rediscovered. It's kind of hard to say at this point, but that was the scene, 13, 14 years ago.
I know as more wisdom has emerged also from the Mayan communities, there seems to be indication that actually cacao ceremony isn't really traditional from the Mayan sense, and that this is actually a newer development that we're working with here on our earth. So I'm curious about what your relationship to cacao ceremony is, what that means to you, and how if it's changed at all throughout your time working with cacao.
Yeah, it's definitely changed over time. I very intentionally try to describe cacao ceremony the way I understand it as a modern phenomenon, mainly because I am not immersed in or trained in a particular lineage that's not my own. And so I think that's an important thing to acknowledge, and not that there aren't those traditions. I think that world can get a little bit fraught with kind of some very exacting purity standards around who has what and who owns this and that, and it gets a little odd quick, I think. And so it's easier for me just to be like, I come to it from a modern perspective. I'm pairing it with other modern practices based on a relationship with cacao itself and the ways that it supports people's growth and healing that I've experienced myself that I want to share with others. And Yeah, I mean, it's it's a complex world to dive into the history, the use, what we think we know of what people did 1,000 years ago. I think it's easier, for a lot of people just to put some super broad strokes on it was like sacred to them, and then, some people who are new to it might assume that it looks like what it looks like in the modern world, and my guess is it probably doesn't for the most part. Especially in the more advanced civilizations like Mayans, Aztecs, etc., where um, it was a little bit like champagne. It was not for the masses, really. It was a pretty specialty use thing. But my wife at one point spent some time like on the borders of Costa Rica, Panama, deeper in the jungle, and she met groups where there was some inclination of cacao ceremony, cultural practices that were mostly lost, at least to the people that she interfaced with. Further in, they might have been more intact, but the general sense she got was it was something along the lines of imbibing cacao, the drink form, and that was tied into their ceremonial practices. So something that we might recognize more as akin to a modern ceremony. What I saw when I was in Guatemala was where cacao showed up was more in offerings, like offerings to the fire and the fire ceremony, less of the imbibing a larger dose and then working with the psychoactive effects of cacao to do healing work. So yeah, I guess for me it's a modern thing in that regard because I'm not drawing from indigenous or particular lineage, worldviews, practices, etc. And yeah, I guess for me over time, changes are, when I first started working with cacao, I was in my late 20s. I had no kids. I wasn't really tied to a lot of responsibilities. So it was a lot easier to spend a lot more of my life energy on this I guess in ceremony and in this work. And I now have 4 kids and a house and a mortgage and all the things that come with it. And life's a lot busier. And so what it looks like for me personally has definitely changed a lot over time. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your response. There are two things that kind of pinged me a little bit. So you said your wife was in like southern Costa Rica near Panama.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, um, there. I did a retreat last year in Costa Rica, and we were able to meet with the Brew tribe
Uh-huh.
and have that connection there. And it's really fascinating their connection to cacao. And from what I know and what they explain is like they have 4 strains of cacao that they grow within their jungles, and they have it specifically used for different uses. Like there's the
Uh-huh.
social one, the strain that they use for daily drinking. There's the one that they use for like parties. There's the one that
Uh-huh.
they use for ceremony, only
Uh-huh.
exclusively for ceremony if it's for weddings or somebody passing on. But like I think it's really interesting having a specific strain of cacao for a specific. I guess it gives a specific energetic effect as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious. Was it the Brew tribe that your
Yeah,
wife?
I'm pretty sure it was that she spent some time with. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I was curious about too is, we're relating to a plant that isn't indigenous to the lands that we come from.
Uh-huh.
And for me and my understanding of being human on this earth, it's just like finding a way to know myself better, finding a way that I can show up and be a better human in this world. And what practices you use or how you use ceremony connecting to the lands that you're on with this medicine that actually isn't from where we are from,
Uh-huh.
and what your personal relationship is with that now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as a modern human in a globally interconnected world, the way I look at it is that most things that we interact with on a daily basis, where we didn't make them, they don't come from the land where we are. And so in that context of, we're, in a daily survival sense, we rely on a global supply chain of, products and goods and all of that. And so the way I think about cacao in that context is what doing cacao ceremony or working with cacao more intentionally does is it just brings more reverence to something that is already happening. Anyways, people are eating chocolate, they're drinking hot chocolate, etc. And what I think the cacao ceremony movement has done is offer a more reverential attitude at a just at a baseline for in outside of the impact the ceremonies have had on the people who partake in them, like what the interest in cacao ceremony has done, as far as I can see, is um, just increase the reverence that people have for this plant, for how it's grown, how the farmers farm it. Um, the cacao ceremony movement definitely is in at least in the U.S. is kind of runs off the coattails of the craft chocolate movement in the sense of various ways of craft chocolate have really increased the availability of really high quality cacao sources that are ethically sourced, that are grown in really good ways, that increase the diversity of cacao available to us. So there's like currently we source one of our cacaos comes from Peru. It's called Pura Blanco, and it's been grown continuously for 1,000 years. Um, and if there were not an export market, likely they would choose other crops. Um, and so the the impact that I see is that it's actually brought more interest to the diversity of cacao, treating it well, etc. Obviously, outside of just the impact of participating in a ceremony and that it has on the transformational impact. So I guess that's how I think about it. Is it has just kind of increased the quality and the reverence for what we consume. And I think the like we're kind of in this little in the last 10 plus years, this kind of revival of psychedelics that's been going on. And so I think the interest in plant medicines, etc., has grown, and just bringing more awareness to something that a lot of people already have a relationship with or know about is in my mind, that's a positive thing.
I love the simplicity of that too. It's just like bringing more reverence to what we're consuming,
Yeah,
shifting the focus, shifting the inner conversation of what we're inputting into our bodies and how we view it.
yeah,
And it can be that simple, and allowing that ceremony to really begin to flow from our actions.
yeah. I mean, I think I'm more. I don't know. There's definitely views out there around like it's certain people shouldn't be doing cacao ceremony or it's inappropriate or how do we square that it's not native to here and all that kind of stuff. And the easiest way for me to think about that is like, okay, so what if we just stopped doing it all? What would that do? Would that create more benefit? I mean, the cacao farmers that we source from wouldn't like that. They get paid premium wages to produce premium product, keep their own traditions alive because there's money to be made. And we're talking about a whole bunch of small scale players. It's not like one big thing. And so these are real people that are trying to make a living by growing various crops, including cacao. And to view, kind of people from the West coming in and wanting to source higher quality stuff and pay better for it and have it treated well, to me just seems like a kind of an all around net positive thing. And that's an easier way to think about it.
I just want to let that sink in because when we're actually I think it's really about understanding that interconnection of how we are in a global market. So we are supporting everything that we buy is supporting the source that it's coming from.
Uh-huh.
And I'm curious from your perspective or your what you can feel into of the benefit or the negative impact that the cacao industry, like the ceremonial cacao industry, could have on the global, like for farmers, what that actually looks like, or the implications of ceremonial cacao becoming even more popular, and maybe even what you've seen over the past 14 years, and maybe predictions
Huh.
or visions, what you would
Um,
like it to look like.
yeah.
Okay, lots of questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think if when we first started back when we were hard blood, it was, I mean, you couldn't buy ceremonial cacao anywhere. And now you can find high quality cacao sourced from, almost anywhere in the world it grows. And So from my perspective, it's a net benefit in the sense that it's giving more visibility to a lot of different to cacao and all of its beautiful diversity. Like you were talking about the brie and their different strains. I mean, cacao is it's so complex. There's lots of differences. It grows all over the world. I mean, you can have cacao that tastes like blueberry. You can have cacao that tastes like nuts. There's like all this, complexity and beauty to it, and not just the ceremonial cacao world, but the interest in high quality chocolate, craft chocolate, etc., has really increased the demand for that, which I think has then turned into farmers choosing to do that and to do it well and to get paid well. Is there a possibility of negative impact or exploitation? I think, of course, like anything, the bigger it gets, more players come in who might have less transparent sourcing or less, their standards might be different on how they source. And so that's really just I think it's up to consumers to be informed, to ask questions of their providers. I'm a big proponent of transparency and traceability, so knowing where the cacao comes from, what farmers get paid, and growing practices. There's a lot of good questions to ask that can help differentiate what I might say, like, just kind of like mass market cacao versus more like specialty high end cacao that, kind of start to finish, people are working with the best they can and doing it in the best way they can. Yeah.
So I have two questions. The first one is, what is important for you in sourcing for Imbue cacao? And the
Uh,
second one is, what is your definition of ceremonial cacao? And if there's any distinguishing factors between premium, ethically sourced and harvested cacao and what makes it actually ceremonial?
yeah, that's a great question because it's unlike organic, there isn't some certifying body. Um, it's a very loose term. So for me, ceremonial cacao, what it means to me and what we do at Imbue is highest quality start to finish, and that's not just in the cacao itself, but it's in how we do what we do. So in sourcing, we always work with smallholder farms. So usually that's like, farms that are an acre or two in size, and they are selecting for premium varieties of cacao or more interesting, unique varieties. Cacao is not, there's no GMO cacao out there. That's not a thing. So there's just various amounts of hybridization. There are, some really small scale sources that are what we might call true heirloom. I mean, cacao genetics is a whole rabbit hole that PhD studies could spend years following along with, and it's fascinating. It gets oversimplified for the public's consumption and for marketing purposes. Um, but so, for us, it's interesting genetics. A lot of that is just, there's the primary cacao strain that's grown is CCN51. It's just a very prolific and disease resistant cacao. There's nothing bad about CCN51. It's not genetically modified. It's kind of like if you're a farmer and you're like, this is my livelihood. I don't want to lose my crop to pests. I want to grow a lot per acre. CCN51 is the workhorse that a lot of them choose. It doesn't have much of interest in terms of flavor and qualities. It's not preserving much genetic heritage. So we like to source for more unique strains of it. Um, it's important how farmers are paid, what the setup is. And part of the setup is that because cacao has some really important post-harvest steps, so after it's harvested, there's a couple things that need to happen pretty much on site or very close by. So there needs to be adequate facilities. So after it's harvested, if it's high quality cacao, it gets fermented and then sun dried. So a lot of cacao that's just kind of commodity cacao just gets washed. They open the pod, they wash the pulp off. You've got it good to go as far as kind of commercial mass market stuff. The fermentation creates this enzymatic change. It develops a lot of the unique flavors in it. It also burns off some of the bitters, the tannins, the phytic acid, things that make it less digestible for humans. And the fermentation is this art and science of a massive pile of cacao fermenting all at once, and how to manage that process with the right facilities is a really important step. And that's part of what I think the kind of modern interest in cacao has done, is help people invest in setting up those things and get trained in those things. So for small scale farmers in our sourcing model, it's consolidating in a kind of cooperative or community setting where they need sufficient quantities of cacao that they wouldn't have on their own farm for an acre or two to do the fermenting. So often that means it gets sold wet, so they get better prices for their cacao because there's weight loss that happens through the process. Um, so yeah, so for us, it's the, where it's grown, the unique varieties, the farmers, how they're paid, the conditions, are they taken care of post-harvest in a way that's pretty transparent, high quality. So you can do things like a cut test where you cut the bean in half, you open it up, and you can see how the fermentation is proceeding and actually get a sense of how well the batch is fermented. Um, and then from there, for us, kind of just on this through line of what is ceremonial cacao and what creates high quality at each step of the way, um, is so we're bringing it in there to our shop, and we do the roasting, the winnowing, the refining, the conching. And again, for me, ceremonial cacao is how do we do those each of those steps in a way that produces the best quality product that we can and brings out the best in each cacao. So, for example, we have different roast profiles for different cacaos that we work with to bring out different aspects of it. So yeah, I guess the if I were to summarize what is ceremonial cacao, it's the highest quality, purest form of cacao for humans. I don't recommend raw cacao to people. I don't think there is much actual raw cacao because even in the fermentation pile, it gets above 120 Fahrenheit, so it's already past that. And if you don't roast it, there's risk of bacteria accumulation. It's harder to remove the husks, that kind of stuff. So ceremonial cacao to me is um, the processing steps that are necessary, but then not going much further. Like if you take cocoa powder, commercially available, they defat the cacao. So cacao tends to be about 50% cacao butter by weight. And usually with hydraulic press, they remove that and you get left with cocoa solids. So you've basically taken out half of the nutritional profile of the product. And then, they're obviously, so sometimes after that, then they'll Dutch it, which is a chemical process. So they're altering it again. Um, so cacao needs alteration in a sense to be available and usable for humans. And ceremonial cacao is how do we get the highest quality that's processed, but the least amount. So we retain as much of the nutritional qualities as possible.
Yeah, thank you for your definition on that. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because like so many people have a different relationship to like what ceremonial grade is, and
Yeah.
it's like a huge spectrum,
Yeah.
really.
I find thinking about matcha as a helpful analogy because there's ceremonial grade matcha, which is not actually a fuzzy thing. It's a very specific thing in terms of the plant, the cut, the process, etc. And for me, even though that standard is not quite the same in cacao, it's like how do we set the bar where what we're talking about when we say ceremonial grade is not a fuzzy thing of like, I've heard people say like it has to come from this country or, it has to be blessed by a certain person. And those kind of things to me are setting up like artificial boundaries where we can actually set real kind of step by step quality things that are both, they're not just like process oriented, they're also energetic. Like what's the exchange like with the farmers that grow it, and is it organic? Are they using chemicals? Because a lot of cacao out there, even ceremonial cacao, is not actually organic, and they're kind of relying on the hope that farmers are not spraying. But cacao is actually a pretty heavily sprayed crop because if a farmer is going to rely on it for their livelihood, there's a chance of something happening. Why not spray? Unless it's certified organic, which is I'd say of the various certifications out there, to me, it's the one that feels most important because it sets a real baseline standard for what is definitely not in the cacao.
Yeah, it is. I think it's a really fascinating conversation that actually needs to be had. Of the importance of regulating certain aspects of it. And I'm sure it will emerge at some point within the ceremonial cacao industry that's growing and growing. But where do you feel that that would be something that's important to have like some sort of guild or association that's like, this is what the definition of ceremonial cacao is, like with matcha, or even like in the craft coffee world as well? There are really clear definitions and guidelines as to what that is. And do you feel that that's necessary within the ceremonial cacao industry?
No, I don't think so. And I guess that's more of a personal preference for not having, most likely what would be government involvement in a lot of this kind of stuff. I would rather see more of a focus on education and consumer awareness so that people know what questions to ask than on a more top-down, because then if it's top-down, then someone has to be the person setting it, and that has its own that own challenges of who and why and how are they setting that standard, and will that, if it was, you know, in some imagined world, if it actually was a standard and it was enforced, you know, who and how is it being enforced and how is it being set up versus people having agency and, making decisions that are informed or not. And, there will probably be people who have what I would call lower quality cacao. I know for a fact that there are cacaos out there that charge more than we do that's lower quality because I know how they source, I know what goes into it. Um, and that's going to happen. And I think I would prefer to live in a world where people take responsibility for themselves and what they relate with in their everyday lives, and to then, choose the companies or choose the sources that they feel like they trust. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, if we lived in a world where everybody took responsibility for their actions and lived in integrity with that. Um, I'm curious about the places where you source from. So you mentioned Peru,
Uh,
and are there any other places that you do source from?
Yeah, so for most of our history, we source from Guatemala, pretty exclusively. Every now and then, we would bring in a couple other origins just as a tryout. Currently, we don't have any Guatemalan cacao. In the last 2 years in Guatemala, pretty hard hit with droughts, wildfires, just poor harvest years. So there's no organic high quality cacao coming out of Guatemala right now. There are still some people that are selling cacao from Guatemala. I don't think it meets the criteria that we would source from. Um, so we added in when we were running down the Guatemalan, we added in the one from Peru, the Pura Blanco, which is actually it's fascinating because it grows in a desert, and it's this really unique cacao because there's these streams that come down out of the Andes that create the microclimate even within the desert to grow cacao, which is pretty unique. It's been growing for about 1,000 years, as I was saying earlier. That it kind of the strains and what they have came from the jungle over the mountains. And then the other origin we have right now is called Semiliki Forest from Uganda in East Africa. And I'm really liking that one. Also, it's got just the flavor, the flavor profile of it is really delicious. It's got like that kind of classic chocolate, a little bit of fruity. It's got a great story behind it as well. Both origins, all of our sourcing, it's small scale farmers working through a central processing facility for post harvest. Um, with transparency and a mission around social impact, ecological practices. So those are our two origins right now, and we're kind of behind the scenes still exploring a couple others. Because it'd be nice to have another origin. I really like highlighting the diversity of what's out there and what's possible with cacao. And this kind of moment in time right now in the international cacao market is just total nightmare in terms of like earlier this year. international cocoa prices hit a high of over 4 times what average prices have been. So they, for a lot of years, they kind of float around $2.50 a kilo that a farmer would get, and they spiked to over $11 a kilo earlier this year, and so that creates this ripple effect where like at this point, we're paying over 50% more for beans. And unlike some of the big candy companies that'll say, okay, we're just going to put less chocolate in the mix this time, or we're going to focus on something that doesn't have chocolate, we're making 100% cacao. So that has a pretty direct impact, and that also has a big impact on sourcing and sourcing availability. Like part of what happened in Guatemala is a lot of the Mexican buyers, Mexico consumes a lot of cacao. They import cacao, so the Mexican buyers were literally driving around in trucks with cash buying up cacao. And for a farmer, it makes a lot more sense just to get cash right up front, not bother with the fermentation. It's very understandable, but what it means is that a lot of it gets snapped up. The smaller, the origins that we work with are pretty specialty and niche. So they're a little bit buffered, but eventually it catches up.
As you were speaking, I like heard this idea in a different way because there are a lot of more indigenous communities talking about what was happening with cacao over this past year and how it's we're not treating the spirit of cacao with respect. That's why all these things are happening, and the climate change of just what's happening, what we're doing to the earth, really, essentially. But as you were speaking, it almost this like new idea came in that it's she's raising her voice in the sense of like raising the prices. Like we got to raise awareness around this because it affected all of the chocolate industry,
Uh-huh.
and all of the prices of chocolate went up. And then it's like you're forced into conversation with people who actually aren't really thinking about this. They're just buying their chocolate, but they're like, now why is it four
Yeah.
times as much as it was? And then I had this conversation when I was visiting in Vienna recently. I was buying some chocolate, like ceremonial cacao there, and she's like, "Oh, I just have to let you know I know it was so much cheaper, but this is what's happening." And I'm like, "No, I know. I'm
Yeah.
aware of the situation." She's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I just have to let people know." And it's like now it's a conversation that's happening with more and more people.
Yeah, I mean, there's, the positive side of it all is that farmers can earn more. It will likely be a bubble in the kind of a longer, if you look at a graph of cacao prices, they're gonna come back down because supply and demand just, a lot of the big companies are already switching, to emphasizing other things. And so a big part of the price increase was that last year, West Africa, which produces the vast majority of cacao for the international market, just had a really bad year, and then the finance guys got a hold of it, and they're kind of bidding back and forth on the futures contracts for this price, that price, and it spiked. um, so eventually, supply and demand, if a lot of companies switch away from it, or the price is too high for consumers, and then it kind of levels back out and the price will level out. So I think it'll come back down at some point, but I think you're right, it does raise awareness of something that we've relied on as a you know cheap commodity. And what's the impact of that? Like a lot of people say, oh, I care about, how farmers are treated, but then I don't want to pay this much for my cacao or chocolate when that's what it would cost if the farmers were paid a decent wage. Or yeah.
Yep. There, I'm curious as to just working with the different cacaos, if you sense a difference in the energy or between the African cacao that you now are sourcing with
Uh-huh.
versus the Peruvian and the Guatemalan cacao, and your experience with that.
Yeah. I would say yes and no. I know, like, you're starting with the Brie, and there's some other companies that talk about like the distinct energy of different origins. For me, I don't find it so obvious, I guess I would say, or so noteworthy. And I think a big part of that, not because there aren't differences, there clearly are. There's differences in chemical makeup and amounts of compound, like how much theobromine and how much PA and antibody, the blend of those and what do they do all together, etc. I think that's there. Um, but also because cacao is a subtler energy, so much depends on the space that we enter into it. So with the same origin, I can have one experience that feels milder, or like there's less like it's like doing something crazy, and then other times it just like hits me really hard. And depends, I usually just say like with cacao, set and setting is so important because it's not just taking you on the ride. You need to set yourself up to go on the ride if you really want to go deeper with it. Like you could have a full ceremonial dose, take 2 ounces of cacao, and then go do your daily business, and you probably would just think, oh, like I feel a little stimulated, and that's the extent of it, Or you could do that same thing and sit with a group in ceremony that really is intending to allow deeper things to surface, and it'll happen. Um, so I guess with differences in origin, sometimes I think it's when people talk about the energetic differences, it seems overblown to me. More marketing, like, to say that this is distinctly this, to me seems less accurate than um, almost like if there's a spectrum of how cacao influences us in different kind of ways, that it might be a little bit more this, a little bit less that. Like um, when I was actually testing out the origins, I had this image come to mind because in the chocolate world, they do these flavor wheels for chocolate. And the flavor wheel is hitting things like amount of bitter, amount of fruit, amount of floral, sweet, all the different notes. And there's kind of like this, they call them the spider charts, because it might be like high in bitters and low in this and high in that. And it's almost like so you're still on this wheel of this is the kind of the context that you're in. And I think the energetic impact might be similar in that, like, if you're like the energizing effects might be like one part of that, or like paying attention to subtle energies or intuition support, like you might get a little bit of variation around it between origins. But my guess would be that the biggest impact is just how we approach it. Um, Assuming that you're working with, high quality pure cacao and enough of a dose to really pay attention, I think that that's probably going to have a bigger impact than the what I would think of as the more subtle nuances between the origins. Yeah.
I really appreciate that answer because it is so dependent on also our relationship to ourselves at that moment. And also
Mhm.
for me and my relationship with cacao is like, and all plant medicines is like they give you what you need, not necessarily what you want in that moment. And
Mhm.
sometimes the medicine, even with the same cacao, kind of changes as we grow, as we release, as whatever we're coming with
Mhm.
to this day, to this cup.
Yeah.
And as fun as it is to dive into those, like, oh, this is what this cacao stimulates. For me, I find it a little bit challenging too because it's always different. Like it's fun to harness and intend that. But then it's also about listening to what's here in the moment.
Yeah, it's a little bit like I mean, again, akin to the flavors, like I think people like the idea that we all notice these subtle different flavors, and we're all like connoisseurs and we know what we're doing. And I've been to chocolate tastings where pretty much everyone says something different, sometimes like almost diametrically opposite, and it's kind of like, okay, everyone's right. We all taste something different. Like, great. And so I think it's fun to imagine that we're so tuned in that we just notice that all of the time. And maybe some people do, but sometimes it's like if I read descriptions of like Hapé, or even just like, pot at this point has been around and hybridized for so long that the descriptions they have are just like so specific, but the experience is so much fuzzier and more blurred, and it's almost like people more want to have the menu of options instead of like how much they actually notice that like this one is really specifically for like masculine or the war energy, or like softer, or whatever the different descriptions are.
I think that's touching on a really important subject too. Is just that honesty with ourselves, and it's easy to kind of hide behind these ideas or what we want, and then recognizing that, okay, so if I'm wanting these qualities, this is something I need to cultivate within me, that it's not
Right.
this external source that's going to give this to me. but where can I take responsibility for myself and acknowledge that this is a beautiful plant? Let me treat it with respect and then allow myself to support myself on this journey as I begin to integrate and embody these qualities that
Hmm.
I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I think that um, cacao is really helpful in that regard because there's a lot less of a sense of cacao is doing it to us. And I think it's a much more active collaboration, or we need to be more available than if we were, say, like a psychedelic where you can kind of just lay back and let it happen. And that's not totally accurate, obviously, but just it's way more that way with a psychedelic. Whereas with cacao, even if you just kind of lay back and like hope that, cacao somehow transforms your life, you're probably going to be disappointed. And I think that there's this training course that I do, and through that and all the ceremonies over the years, like that's one of the biggest things that comes up is people's expectations about what's going to happen, usually in the passive sense of it. Like, I'm going to use this plant medicine and it's going to do X, Y, Z for me that will make things better in my life. Whereas in my experience, all healing work, all powerful realization, change, etc., come when we are looking at ourselves in a deeper way, in a new light, etc., where we're actually having to see things that might not be pleasant or let go of something that we've been holding on to that we didn't realize. Not just because something kind of comes in and makes it all pretty.
Yeah. It's I find really beautiful integrator, and she's helped me ground ground
Mm,
down like where I could be very flighty and just like, then it's like, oh no, allow your roots to go really deep. And then like you said, yeah, it's just not like the psychedelics that give these images, but it's like she provides the space, the opportunity, like, okay, you're safe now. Well,
mm,
I'll give you this blanket, I'll give you this embrace, and I'll make you feel comfortable while you're looking at these parts that are
mm.
really
Yeah,
hard to look at,
yeah, yeah,
but you have to
yeah.
look.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the beauty of cacao as a plant medicine is the subtlety, and that can be overlooked. Like I've definitely heard people like, "Oh, I didn't feel anything," and then I'm like, "Okay, so what did you feel?" And like, "Oh, I just felt kind of like pleasant and okay." And I was like, "Do you normally feel that way?" "No, usually I'm pretty busy and I'm kind of stressed, and I just felt pretty relaxed." I was like, "Oh, maybe there's something there." And if we start to tease that out, that kind of subtle shift almost in like baseline way of being, functioning, experiencing things, it can actually be really powerful. And I think that that's something that gets overlooked because people want this kind of like get clobbered over the head change kind of experience, and then everything is just better going forward. Whereas cacao is kind of this like subtle reflecting back that desire for things to be different and to be able to sit with that and just be with it all.
And in a world where we're so used to being stimulated constantly
Hmm.
and
Yep.
overstimulated, and there's this one YouTuber I really like to follow named Rian Doris, and he's all about entering flow state and optimal flow state. And I just remember this one video he shared where he's like, he's talking about caffeine and being caffeinated, and he's Irish. I'm not going to do an Irish accent, but he talks about, when you look out into the skyline in New York, you're looking at a caffeinated society. And I was like, wow, that really
Oh,
hit me visually because I was like, I live in New York, but imagine we all drank cacao.
uh,
What would that horizon look like? What would actually come through? And that softness, allowing for that softness, like you said, that the person you just spoke of who was like,
uh,
I don't feel anything, but it's like
uh,
actually you do.
mm-hmm.
Allowing that realization in.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, and I think that's, I think a lot of people are feeling that desire. That's why cacao ceremony is really taken off, is a lot of people um, want to experience themselves in a more expanded way. They want to feel their heart more open, their heart more connected, and it's such an accessible medicine. It's not illegal. We already use chocolate. The vast majority of people already use chocolate regularly, so there's very little safety concerns. Like I had someone a student for my trains asked me recently about like, oh, well, what about people saying that you shouldn't serve cacao to others without like years of formal training and this, that, and the other? And I'm like, well, would that person also say that you can't buy a chocolate bar and decide on your own dose, you know? Because that's, that's in the realm of what we're talking about. And so it's a very accessible plant that people can learn to work with on their own, and the risk factor is just super, super low. In 15 years of working with myself and thousands of others, nothing serious has ever happened. Um, and I think that appeals to a lot of people because it's like it's a more empowering practice, just like being able to meditate or do yoga yourself. You can wake up and have your cacao ritual, and feel the connection with the plant world, and that there are other consciousnesses that can enter ours and have an impact us in a positive way. And I think that speaks to a lot of people in this kind of modern resurgence of interest in plant medicines in general and psychedelics, and just altering consciousness has kind of come back to us. And cacao has a really cool place in that mix. For me, it's not like a better or worse. It's just like sometimes you just need that. Like I'm going for a weekend and I'm going real deep, and I really need to get out of a rut that I've been in. Like I need to be hit over the head a little harder this time. Other times, I think it's really important just to focus on what you're saying, like the integration, the kind of daily baseline of what does regularly, reminding myself that uh, everything is sacred, and there's no ultimate difference between ceremony and not ceremony, and kind of shifting into life that way, with all of its ups and downs and busyness and stresses and everything else.
Yes, I love that. Like sometimes it takes me a little time to process because I'm like really integrating, what you're saying, and it's there empowering is a word that comes up with cacao a lot.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's a really beautiful illustration that you gave us of this, and this is why, because we have control over our relationship with it, and we can begin to devise our own sanctuary in our home from this space that we feel comfortable with. I'm really curious about your children's relationship with cacao and how it is like growing up in this beautiful chocolate home, and the effects you've seen that for your children.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to compare because they've always had it. So I don't have I don't have an analogy what they don't have in their. So all of them love it. They've always loved it. They'll just chew on pieces of pure cacao, unsweetened. I mean, we don't do cane sugar in my house, so they still like plenty of sweet things, maple syrup, honey, etc. So that's there's definitely like an element to it that's just loving the taste of it with a little bit of sweet in it. Yeah, it's hard to say what the impact on them is. I mean, I think it's like my wife and I pretty much without fail every afternoon. At this point, I'm more of an afternoon cacao drinker than a morning cacao drinker. Pretty much every afternoon we have cacao together, and in a busier life, it's not like we get to sit for an hour quietly. It's sitting together for about 5 minutes until one of the kids jumps on us, or something else comes up. But it's become a daily ritual that's really beautiful. And sometimes the kids ask to have their own cup, and we'll make them some cacao also, and they get to sit with us. And I think there's something nice about those moments that feel like daily rituals or comforting things, or just how to participate in things together as a family is really beautiful. But just, yeah, I guess it's hard for me to assess like what would have happened if they didn't have the cacao. What would be different?
Of course, you don't have a
Yeah.
control child.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have control child. I mean, when in the early days we started doing cacao ceremony, my wife and I, before we had kids, and then we had our first, and he started coming along with us, and that worked well for about 4 or 5 years until he was very active, and then it was stacking the yoga blocks and making forts, and then that kind of slowly got more challenging. But it was great having kids in ceremony. I think that's really important, like that they're able to drop in. And um, so that's something that just like, our kids are around that in various ways, not just because of cacao, but because we choose that in our life. And I think that that's missing a lot in modern life, is just the ability for kids to be contained by a larger energy that has some kind of like gravitas to it, that has some weight, that they have a place within, that isn't just horsing around all the time.
because it creates a sense of purpose and belonging, and that there's something bigger than us, right? It's not just our family nucleus. Like that, wow, you get to look around and see all these people practicing in the same way that
Uh-huh.
my parents are, or it means something to them, and then and finding your place within that community, that larger web, I think is super super important and something
Uh-huh.
that yeah, like I was searching for my whole life, and I never really had that growing up. You're a part of certain clubs or things like that, but that feeling of belonging,
Uh-huh.
connecting to something bigger than you, and then seeing other people doing that as well is really powerful.
Uh-huh.
I grew up Catholic, so Roman Catholic, but finding these ways, especially like the indigenous practices throughout the globe that I've studied, and it is the understanding of the intergenerational connection, but also yeah, just coming together, seeing each
Uh-huh.
other for who you are in that moment. And it's
Uh-huh.
not always about you, right?
Yep.
Especially with your kids.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
What anchor points do you find or do you use for you when you have this beautiful company that you're building, a very active family, and how do you stay grounded within it, within your business, within your life, within your family, especially with this heart-centered medicine? How do you
Yeah.
stay in alignment with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's probably my like the leading edge of my own personal challenge is having a busy life, a lot on my plate, and staying connected to something a little bit deeper than just the kind of like motions of the practical details that take up a lot of time in a in a modern life, especially as a adult and a parent. There's not a whole lot of time for that, and I think that's okay. Like my view of parenting is not like so much like how do I try and carve out more space for myself for self-care. It's actually like this stage of life is a giveaway. It's not supposed to be about me. Look at any other species of mammal taking care of their young, and it's a pretty constant job. So for me, in that, it's the little moments. It's just like I've had to find deeper resources in myself, essentially, to stay in a place that I feel good about, that I can show up with my kids in that way and do the work that I do. Like with the new shop, I'm busier than I've ever been, running the production side of it and trying to share the medicine more widely. And so I think for me, it's how do I dig deeper inside to find something that's less subject to the whims of the comings of goings of life, because that happens and it's going to keep happening. And so yeah, I don't, there's not a, for me at this point, there's not a particular practice. Like I don't have like, I meditate for 15 minutes in the morning. It's more just like an ongoing flow of being aware of where I'm at, what's going on, and continuing to come back to what I want out of it. Like, if I'm in some cycle of feeling angry or frustrated or sad or something, it's it's kind of just letting it all be there, which I think is really important. Like at this point, I don't struggle a lot with what's there, which I think is helpful, even if it's not pleasant. It doesn't help it in any way, but just noticing and coming back to what brings me most alive and what I want out of my life, even if it's hard or challenging. Like we homeschool our 4 kids and we have a homestead. My wife does a lot of gardening and we raise animals, and it's a lot. And at times it feels overwhelming, but if I dig deeper, what I want is a life that's rich for my family, for my kids, to be around real things and um, be able to follow their passions and curiosities. And so tapping into that deeper sense of what I want in my life helps remind me of what's important and kind of come back to what's beyond the story and the feelings.
Witnessing you and just beaming you so much love and that
Mm,
energy of like, wow, that is very challenging, and it's a beautiful journey. But I homeschooled my daughter for 2 years, and just one, you know. I have
Uh-huh.
a friend that also homeschools her four children, and it's a full-time job
Uh-huh.
along with a business and everything that you're doing. So really just honoring you and everything that you're holding and creating in this life.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot, and my wife Amba holds a lot of that, and it's yeah, it's being a team in that makes it way easier for sure.
I would love to know the vision for Imbue. What is your mission? What's your guiding force that calls you?
Uh, same answer as what's the mission of Cacao? It's just to share the love as much as I can. And I think for me personally, on a deeper level, like I want to spend my time being a unifying force of bringing things together, things feeling connected, and cacao is one way to do that, is to share this plant and ways of thinking about it and working with it that help people feel more connected and whole. So that's kind of like the original inspiration. It's still, for me, again, tuning in on that deeper level of why do the work I do when there's options of what I could do for work or doing something that I feel good about. Like my undergraduate degree is in business, and about three-quarters of the way through, I was like, I want nothing to do with the world of business. It's just like, I was reading all this stuff about the impacts of environmental, social impacts that a lot of corporations can have. And I was like, I want nothing to do with this world. And so having my own company is a chance to do it differently, to do it the way that I want to do it. And that's one of the great things about being an entrepreneur is just making the choices that I want to make about the company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then slowly growing and collaborating and then little by little we shift the paradigm. So that's what's taught in business in like 10, 15 years from now
Hmm.
is what you're living right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would love to know what your favorite fact about cacao is, or like new scientific finding, something that really lights you up that you're like, oh, I want people to know this.
Yeah. Yeah, the two ones I'm most curious about these days are cacao genetics and cacao history. I was just reading an article recently about this site in Peru. I don't have a lot of information about it because it's relatively new, but I think it's something like 5,500 years carbon dated the theobromine residue on the pottery shards. And so I find that stuff fascinating because whenever I learn more about the history, like there's, prior to some of in the last like 5 years, there's been more archaeological evidence about cacao and its use and where that is and when that's from. That kind of, it's like every time those revelations happen, it's like it just expands our view of life and um, kind of like when science is like, oh, we thought it was just like everything existed on this level, and then there's a level below it, and it's like, whoa, that's the new level, and then like, oh no, there's a level below that, and it just our minds expand. And I think that's a really beautiful process of just learning more, knowing that we'll never know it all, we'll never find some kind of ultimate level to it, but um, that there's more to learn, I think, is a really beautiful thing, and that it has such a long history of human use across many different cultures. And that also, for me, one of the things I love about that is it paints the multicultural story of cacao, that it doesn't actually belong to any group of people. Most modern groups we associate it with actually got it from other groups. And I think that's a beautiful thing. That's, it's sharing the cacao love in the same way, and it grows and expands. And I think similarly with genetics, it's such a fascinating world of just what's going on the genetic level, and partly because we used to have such a simple understanding of there's just Criollo, Trinitario, and nowadays, like if you're deep in that world, it's like one of those doorways that opens up many more questions than we have answers to, but that there's just a lot more going on genetically than we know of, and the differences can be significant, and they tie into the history and different kind of growing regions and who is growing what where. So yeah, I think those are the two fields where I find the most kind of my curiosity gets piqued the most because that's where it seems like more of the leading edge of understanding cacao comes from.
Are you familiar with any places that are really studying the scientific aspects of cacao, like sources that are really dedicated to that specifically?
There are various groups that do work on cacao genetics. The one that I can think of offhand is there's a fine there's some chocolate industry groups that essentially are helping to track unique genetics, um, because part of the way that we get money to spend time studying them and propagate them and all that is when there's a commercially viable source for it. And so there's some chocolate industry groups that do some of that work. Obviously, there's geneticists and biologists who do that work, um, and the more that kind of filters back into everyday. Um, Awareness in terms of like, oh, like it isn't just a simple three. There aren't just simple three. And when people throw around the word criollo, like most of the time it's nonsense because they're talking about colloquial terms that are just kind of like the local term for it. And they're not talking about genetics, and those are different things. And how do you separate the kind of marketing hype of like, some people will say, I have Arriba Nacional cacao, and that's not actually a cacao variety. That's a colloquial term for a growing region in Ecuador. And so we learn more as people dedicate a lot of time and energy into like the deeper dives of it. Um, and also, a lot of it I take with a grain of salt because one, our understanding is evolving, but also because cacao cross-pollinates so much, you can have multiple varieties on a tree. And so with Imbue, we've never made a claim to variety with our sourcing because it's just such a fuzzy zone where the only way to do it, I think, would be to say we genetically test like each batch that comes off. Because if one tree could have 12 different varietals on it, I mean, what are we talking about? We're talking about, huge mix of cacao just to make one batch. And so there's a lot of genetic diversity, and there's like, I think certain origins have tendencies. The Pura Blanca one from Peru it's more interesting to me on that regard because it's actually a pretty genetically isolated population. There's a lot less chance of cross-pollination because there's not like there's a huge swath of jungle around for things to migrate. It's actually a pretty controlled microclimate. Um,
Very interesting. I actually wasn't aware of the aspect of criollo, that it's more used as a colloquial term and not necessarily like referring to the genetic product.
There is an actual variety called Criollo, that is, if you ever have a chance to have a chocolate bar that's truly made from Criollo, it's delicious. It's like a really, you can see why it's sought after. But the irony is that actually it's at least in the cacao ceremony world, is that true Criollo is so sought after for chocolate because it's very low in bitters. It's got chocolate punch and it's got low bitters, which means it's lower in theobromine, which is the main psychoactive compound in cacao. So if you actually had genetic Criollo, it would probably have a much softer effect. Criollo it's hard to grow because it's so susceptible to disease. It gets outcompeted by other varieties, and so that's a lot of what happens is someone brings in a hybridized variety that's more successful because that's what a farmer wants. Like I've got blueberries on my property, and if I'm looking at a catalog of blueberries to choose from, it's like, okay, this one produces high yields and it's disease resistant, and those are the things that over time make it, more viable. So that's your livelihood. People bring in different hybrid versions, and then those versions can outcompete some of the local strains. And so it's just a complex picture in that regard in terms of what actually you have. But so Criollo can be a genetics, but what I'm saying is most often when I see it used, they're not referring to genetics, they're referring to the colloquial term, which is just like, this is our cacao that grows around here. Like that's just, because there's like, people even say like Criollo corn, which is just the reference to this is like our thing that grows around here.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And I love those gardening books, those catalogs. They're so
Yeah.
fun to look through. I just like look through them for
Yep.
hours. All the
Yes.
different kinds of lettuce. So
Yeah.
good. I once was shopping at Trader Joe's and they had a Criollo chocolate bar, and I felt like I found gold. And I was like, what? They discontinued it now.
Yep.
But for a little while, you could find that in Trader Joe's, which is pretty
Yep.
neat. What is your favorite thing about being human these days?
Uh, the challenge of it, I think. Um, I think the um, hitting, I'm in my early 40s, so, hitting, like being this age, having the responsibility that I have with kids and home and everything else, it's like, I think it's easy to fall into the kind of humdrum, just the daily things that need to be tended to just to keep the whole thing going. And I don't know, I guess just the challenge of being alive now where we both have access to like unprecedented levels of wealth and creature comforts and everything else. And a lot of us still find ourselves feeling like there's something deeper missing, and it's just the kind of daily challenge of crafting a life that makes sense in some way. And that's I think that's what I find most interesting at this moment in time.
Thank you for sharing the magic within that, because sometimes it is easy to forget in the minutia and the
Yeah,
day-to-day life.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But the challenge is what makes the pearl, right? It's the rub that creates that beauty.
Yeah, and I think that like for me when I was in my 20s and pre-kids, it was like life can be ceremony and I can do this kind of stuff all the time. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized more that I mean, one, it's not meant to be ceremony all the time, and we have to go and get food and take care of the kids, and just there's things to do to tend to life that, most living things spend most of their time doing, and that ceremony is these reminders of connecting to some kind of deeper purpose or deeper sense of what we're about, and the kind of the blending of those and meeting that challenge more head on and not trying to like escape through imagining that it can all be wonderful all of the time, but that we're here in our life at this time on earth, and it is what it is regardless of all the opinions that we have about what it is or how it should be. And I find that a lot less compelling these days. In my 20s, my ideas about the world seemed much more compelling to me, and I find them much less so, because it seems like it's easy to have lots of ideas about how it could or should be, and it's harder just to dig into what we have in front of us and to make something of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's easier to live in the fantasy.
Yeah.
Getting our hands dirty and creating with life, creating the life we have with the hands that we have.
Uh-huh.
I would love to share the blessing left from the previous guest for you is a
Uh-huh.
couple, so you get double blessed. And yeah, just allow yourself to receive receive the love from Alex and Natalie.
I'd like this moment to be an opportunity to remember who you are, to connect with your heart, the spirit, Pachamama, and to know that you are enough. You are enough in this moment. You are enough in every moment. May you feel at all moments, even through life's challenges, the vibration of love that is you. May this vibration be a guide. May it help you move deeper into presence and into ultimate full realization of I am. I am enough. I am enough. I am love. I am love. and love. Namaste.
I give thanks to your heart. May it continue to open to receive any messages on this journey, and just to trust. Yeah, just feeling into that love frequency. Yeah.
That was a blessing for you, for your heart, for your being. May it nourish you.
Thanks.
And I love, still, it's interesting how every blessing is just a little bit different and like really specific to the conversations that we have as well. And if you feel called to share a blessing for our next guest, and I would love to share that with them.
Sure, yeah. What comes to mind for me to share is a reminder that magic is possible, that at any moment something different can happen than what we expect, and all the change and healing and transformation that can flow, and that there are many, many people out there that are grateful for you sharing cacao, for you sharing that medicine in whatever way you're sharing it. You might not know them or see them, but they're grateful.
So beautiful. Thank you. And I know the next guest very well. And I know that that blessing is very poignant. You said some really specific words that are her spirit. Yeah. So I want to just thank you so much for your time here. And if there are any closing words, anything else you'd like to share.
Yeah, just get started with cacao. There's no right or wrong way to do it. I think just, the one thing I would want people to do is just to not feel shy or reserved and just to get to know it themselves, start drinking it daily and just see what flows from it, and to not feel like there's some kind of big thing they need to understand or do before just giving it a go.
Yes. And so it is so beautiful. So thank you again for your time. And yeah, definitely. I love Embue Cacao. It is like such a beautiful energy and so smooth. And yeah, definitely recommend.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear.
Allowing ourselves to, as we close the space, taking a few moments to center ourselves before we exit this conversation, entering our life again, allowing the integration of all the information, all the wisdom that was shared. And I like to place one hand on my heart, one hand on my belly, feeling that connection to my vessel as we root down towards the heart of the sky, rooting up towards the heart of the earth, and feeling ourselves as this bridge of love, this bridge of wisdom, this bridge of magic that flows through us. And from this space, we give thanks to the heart of the earth, giving thanks to the heart of the sky. We give thanks to the heart of the waters, and we give thanks to the heart of the fire, giving thanks to the heart of the air that we breathe in the four directions that hold us in every moment, giving thanks to the heart of ether and to the heart of the void, and giving thanks to the heart and the spirit of cacao, this beautiful medicine that has woven us together today. May this conversation inspire you. May the wisdom that flourishes within your mind, within your heart, within your spirit, take root and begin to flow into this experience with ease and gentleness and grace. And so it is. And it is done, it is done, it is done, and it is fun, it is fun, it is fun. Thank you for listening to today's conversation. We really hope you enjoyed it, that it nourished you in some deeper way, that it provided new wisdom for you, a deeper understanding of cacao, and maybe some inspiration of how to work with cacao in a new way, or maybe the confidence to share. If you would like to try Embue Cacao, please go to Embue's website. And as always, I hope you take the time to really nourish yourself. Begin to nourish those roots in order to awaken your heart and to embrace, embody, and explore your magic, because you are pure magic.